we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless.
We should prepare to lose our position as holder of the world's reserve currency. That is happening in slow motion. It's unmistakable. Now, the Biden people seem to have no idea this is going on, or maybe they want it to happen. Joe Biden was up there at the State of the Union bragging about how he took 30 points off the Russian ruble in a single day. Hooray, good for us! But once we stop celebrating our win, the destruction of the Russian economy, they deserve it. You gotta wonder, is there a downside to this?
This is why our leaders are so stupid. We basically confiscated the dollars out of the Russian central bank. That's not exactly safe and secure. Basically, countries are saying, wait a second, you can just confiscate our dollars? Like, we went after them and just grabbed the dollars and said, yep, they're no longer valid, converted into rubles. And Russia said, okay, well, that's an act of war, which it is.
I mean, look what the European Union just did with the sanction money from that they took from Russia. They didn't just sanction it, they now confiscated it, and they are using it to rebuild the Ukraine.
These policies have driven Russia, China, India, Turkey, and other countries to accelerate their flight from the US dollar. Now, to be clear, that's the majority of the global economy. This may be the most reckless and destructive thing any American president has ever done to the United States.
This channel, I talk about money, I talk about its moneytainment, about making money and all those things, but I think that it's so important to understand the political landscape to enhance your ability to make money, because the last thing you want to do is invest in a country when there's a war that's about to happen or there's a recession that's about to happen. So if you want to make the best financial decisions, you have to watch, the geopolitical landscape. You have to pay attention to politics, and you have to watch what's going on. And so that's why I took the time out to break some of these concepts for you, so you can see these different perspectives, but you can also see the opportunities that are arising. You're watching the University of Making Money, and I'm your host, Kenim O. And guys, I want to see at least 50 likes on this video, because if I don't see 50 likes, I'm not going to continue this series. Do you guys like the series, The Death of the Dollar? If you do, give us a like so I know that you guys want to see more episodes. I'm not getting enough likes, guys. And make sure you follow, you subscribe, because I see majority of you are not subscribed. Subscribe to this channel so I know that, hey, I should keep making content on this channel. Like this video and let's get into it.
A critical feature of a reserve currency is its apolitical nature, which Biden is now gutting. After both parties in Washington destroyed the dollar's stability with inflation, now the Biden administration has chosen to wield the dollar as a weapon. Together, these two factors send a message to foreigners, which is they should get out while they still can. In response to Russia's war with the Ukraine, the U.S. froze the dollar reserves of Russia's central bank. To be clear, these were not American assets. These were dollars owned by the Russian central bank and the Russian people. The seizure was intended to cause bank runs and collapse Russia's credit system. It didn't work. Instead, it exposed the Biden administration's willingness to violate the trillions of dollars that foreigners rightfully own. The danger of this precedent is difficult to overstate, end quote. These sanctions were never going to work in the way they promised because, unlike the United States, Russia does not have a late-stage finance economy. Russian oligarchs do not get rich from credit default swaps. They get rich from selling actual things that people need in order to live: oil, natural gas, iron, fertilizer, coal, wheat. By some measures, Russia has the largest resource economy in the world. Oh, okay. So they could barter if they needed to. So a year later, despite the sanctions you were told are the greatest ever devised, the Russian ruble is just as strong against the US dollar as it was before the war in Ukraine. So we didn't really hurt Russia with those sanctions, certainly not long term. Who'd we hurt? Ourselves.
And this is a very, very, very big problem. And when we go around trying to as an example, back the Ukraine with $114 billion that we had to borrow, it's crazy, including giving pensions to the Ukrainian government when there's a $1.75 trillion pension shortfall in this country. The world is saying these guys are out of their mind.
Zelensky is under fire for corruption. A new report says he embezzled the aid money. It was released by an American investigative journalist, Seymour Hersh, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter. He says Zelensky and his team have embezzled about $400 million. $400 million. Apparently, this was done last year. Take the case of this man, Timoshenko. He worked in Zelensky's office. Last year, he was seen driving around in an expensive SUV. 2 months later, another report came out. Also more embarrassing pictures. This is Timoshenko driving around in a Porsche Taycan. It's a $100,000 car, 100,000 US dollars. This is a man who worked in the president's office. He got a government salary and was living a life of luxury at a time when Russian forces were bombing his country.
So it's interesting to me how America is sending all of this money to Ukraine and the Ukrainian government is just blowing it. Ukraine is getting all these pensions, all this money, but Americans are homeless? America has a $31 trillion debt? It doesn't make sense. Why would you participate in a war that has nothing to do with us? It's crazy. It's insane. It's insane. We have to get out of this war. We have to stop funding Ukraine. It's not even a part of NATO. It's not our business. It's not our business. Ukraine is not our business. And then this propaganda that everybody has to support Ukraine, I don't care. I do not care. It's not my business.
I don't think people have really thought through the ramifications of our involvement in Ukraine.
So Russia announced it will conduct business in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in Chinese currency.
And then when Xi comes over and says, hey, I have a plan B for you in this currency thing, tell you what, let's take something really valuable. I've got it, energy.
Yeah, that's right.
I need energy, and energy has a hard unit of value coming out of the ground, just like gold does. And so what Xi did is he got value in the form of resources for the renminbi in a deal that looks like a trade deal, but it's a currency deal with Russia.
Right.
Brazil, which has a brand new government supported by the Biden administration, announced it will do the same thing. Brazil, largest economy in the hemisphere after ours. Pakistan is doing the same thing. That's a longtime U.S. ally. India and Malaysia, two of the biggest economies in the world, announced they'll be settling their trade in their own currencies, not the dollar.
And ultimately, what it comes down to is that the world is sick and tired. The world is no longer going to fund white supremacy. Point blank, period. Okay, white supremacy is an extreme term. What's a more lighter way of saying it? Because I know it can deter a lot of people, me saying white supremacist. But white preferring, is that nicer? Okay, so American society is white preferring, right? And there's this white preferring ideology that makes people just soak up all of that, and they don't realize that as they're pushing for the maintenance of the dollar, they don't really articulate what the dollar has done to other nations and how the dollar has oppressed other nations and how capitalism has not served, especially not black people. So, but at the end of the day, capitalism keeps certain groups poor, and America doesn't have the resources that back up its the dollar. You get me? America doesn't really have the resources. China has it, Russia has it, all these countries, they have it, but America doesn't have it like that. It doesn't have the manpower, the brains, but the brains will follow the money anyway. So the brains can leave this country if the money isn't here anymore. But I say all that to say that the world is no longer going to support and fund white supremacy. Don't you think it's ironic how, the war in Ukraine breaks out and the media coverage around that is, oh my God, we're seeing white people, European white people being, we're used to seeing Africans or Middle Easterners being attacked.
Relatively civilized.
They look like any European family.
Christians, they're white.
This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
When they say, oh, civilized cities, and in another clip, well-dressed people, and this is not the third world, they really mean white people, don't they?
No, how we have to defend whiteness. That's, if you ask me, that's the reason for the whole supporting of Ukraine by NATO.
A lot of this is centered on a border dispute on eastern Ukraine. All of this is, if that was not happening the way it was happening, a lot of these chips would not be falling into place, in my opinion. That is the beginning domino, because then Russia said, okay, screw you, we're going to grow closer to China. You know, we're no longer, for the first time ever, Russia has just dropped basically all their dollars out of the central bank because we made them when we put sanctions on them.
Smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, started to dump the US dollar. Why? Because the US dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. And as a result, dollars began to look much less appealing to the rest of the world. And so de-dollarization began, and it has accelerated at remarkable speed, almost without comment in the American media, over the last year. Even France, which we liberated, is using Chinese currency in a new liquefied natural gas trade.
And look what this bastard does to us, the president of France. He goes over to China at the height of tensions, stabs us in the back, says he will not support us. He's provoking the Chinese to act, talks about autonomy. You can stick your autonomy, France, as far as I'm concerned.
He knows that the Chinese Communist Party is infiltrating his country in the same way that they're working in American universities. He knows that they've stolen billions of dollars worth of French intellectual property in the way they have stolen tens of billions of dollars of American intellectual property.
That the patent system is how white people colonize intellectual property. We would not have cell phones if it wasn't for the creation of the gamma electrical cell by black inventor Henry T. Sampson. And most of our cell phones would not have microphones in them if it wasn't for the particular microphone that was created by black inventor James Edward West. The cell phone in my hand came from China. So I don't know if you're referencing Steve Jobs or Martin Cooper or the Finnish inventor who created the first pocket-sized telecommunication device in 1917, and you probably don't know either because your education system has left you terribly ignorant and without the critical thinking skills necessary to effectively gather information. Because you believe that most great inventions can be attributed to one white person, the creation of the first digital network, 1G, was launched in Japan, and then black electrical engineer Jesse Russell pioneered the creation of 2G, which launched in Finland first. 3G launched in Japan, 4G launched in Norway, 5G launched in South Korea, and 30% of the world's cell phones are manufactured in China. Because we, of the global majority, recognize that collective humanity has the ingenuity and creativity of one another to thank, whereas a lot of European Americans are laboring under the delusion that the rest of us have white people to thank.
China, their alliance with Putin, their alliance with Iran, now the Saudis have chosen sides. They're now going with China and Russia and Iran.
China and Saudi Arabia are now major business partners. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening around the world, and all of it is shutting out the US dollar. So if you wanted the rest of the world to trust your currency, the last thing you would do is use it as a weapon or print too much of it. Printing too much of your currency causes inflation, and that saps the value of the currency. No one wants to hold a currency that is worth less consistently every year. That's sixth grade economics. But at this point, you begin to wonder, what does the United States have that will retain its value over time? We should do an inventory of our assets. So Biden, as you just saw, is continuing to send the contents of our treasury, our dollars, to corrupt oligarchs in Eastern Europe and around the world. And yet at the very same time, and you should pay attention to this, he's selling off America's most valuable hard asset. That's our strategic petroleum reserve. Because unlike the US dollar, oil, which is in the reserve, has inherent value. Oil is the densest store of transportable energy known to man. So unlike fiat currencies like the dollar, oil will always have value. That's why Russia is not now impoverished, because they have a lot of oil. But we have less because the SPR has been drained. In the last fiscal year, the Biden administration sold off 218 million barrels of oil, including bewilderingly, criminally, to the government of China. How much oil is that? It's more oil sold from the SPR in 1 year than in all previous years combined. So what happens when we empty it? Well, there's not much left. But what about our gold? America's gold reserves have not been fully audited in generations. So they can say whatever they want, but the truth is we don't really know how much gold is in Fort Knox.
I'm going to try to help explain to the American people that defeating the Russians in Ukraine is the single most important event going on in the world right now.
Defeating the Russians in Ukraine is not the single most important event in the world from the perspective of the United States. It's not even number 15 on the list. It's way below ending the importation of fentanyl into this country, and it's way, way below preserving the strength of the US dollar. But if Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden and the rest of these reckless leaders have their way, an increasing number of countries will do what so many have already done, which is begin to reject the US dollar. And what will happen then? Well, all those dollars will come home, and the value of our currency will plummet even further. And that will lead to poverty across the United States, and that will lead to the typical political and cultural volatility that inevitably follows economic collapse, disaster. And we've seen it before. Of course, you know the famous pictures from Germany in the early 20s. Banknotes and wheelbarrows. When I buy a cup of coffee, that'll be 30 pounds of currency. Kids playing with worthless stacks of Deutschmarks. That was called Weimar, the Weimar Republic. And that government collapsed because of hyperinflation. And then economic collapse led to communist revolutions across Germany and ultimately to, fill in the blank, the Nazi regime.
For example, in the 1920s, the Weimar government printed over 500 billion paper marks. And in just 3 years, inflation rate in Germany got so bad that at its worst, it took 4.2 trillion paper marks just to buy $1 US. Similarly, when Venezuela printed 4 trillion bolivars, by 2020, their inflation rate reached over 4,200%.
If you need proof of how bad it is in Venezuela right now, look at this purse. This purse is made entirely of the bills of the Venezuelan currency, the bolívares. Inflation is so high that this money is now completely worthless. And so my friend Jorge over here has gathered a ton of this stuff and turned it into commodities, into purses, into sculptures.
It is worse than it sounds, and it sounds pretty bad.
The country's inflation rate will rise to 1,000,000%.
The collapse of Venezuela didn't happen because of a civil war or a natural disaster, but rather the colossal economic mismanagement by the country's leader, Nicolás Maduro. In just a few years, Maduro grabbed control of most of the government and then drove the country into an economic disaster worse than the Great Depression and the fall of the Soviet Union.
And guess what? In 2020, the United States of America printed $3 trillion in just 3.5 months. But guess what? Strangely, while in other cases of currency printing, those countries experienced hyperinflation, in case of US, inflation barely touched 9%. In fact, this had a reverse effect whereby instead of inflation increasing just in the US, inflation actually got exported to other countries all across the world.
Why did the German government blow up its own currency? Well, simple. The German government took on too much debt in order to pay for a pointless war. Yes, a pointless war did that. And if that sounds familiar, it's because exactly what we have done repeatedly for decades. We did it in Vietnam. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Afghanistan. And every time we got away with it because uniquely we held the world's reserve currency. But this time could be very, very different. A war against Russia will be the last war we can afford to fight.
What are the consequences for the balloon spying? What are the consequences for taking out an American drone like Putin did?
There have been no consequences, and I think that's part of the challenge that we have on our hands here. Look, it goes beyond these things. That just today, Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them. As we are sitting here, focused on some of these nuttiness that's going on, people that are basically dedicating their lives in this country to ensuring that it is legal to mutilate children, to do drag shows in schools. They dedicate their lives to this, and we have another superpower that basically wants to become the world's dominant power at our expense and these people don't want to focus on it. You know, we had some person on The View yesterday say that our criminal justice system is no better than what China is doing with its genocide of Uyghur Muslims. So we better wake up, or we're going to live in a very different world than the one we've been used to, and it's going to happen very fast.
Meanwhile, U.S. Air Force leaders are releasing a strategic plan that says creating a diverse and inclusive workforce is part of the strategy to, quote, fly, fight, and win against China, General. You've got our armed forces talking about diversity and equity, while China is moving forward with power brokering and leadership across the world. This doesn't look good to me, General.
When you watch Fox News and, you know, Republican rhetoric, they always talk about, like, go woke, go broke. They always talk about, well, you guys are always talking about inclusion in the military, and that doesn't matter right now. We need to, what they're really saying is that we need to preserve white supremacy. Guys, wake up. Let me tell you something, right? Democrats, Republicans, still all white supremacists. What's my pretty word for that? We're not allowed to say white supremacists. We have to say white facing. Is that a nicer term? Is that nicer? They're white facing, right? The Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans are more extremist about it. The Democrats try to pretty it up in a pretty bow for us. Right? They try to pretty it up. And so it's so interesting how, you know, the Republicans have co-opted this word woke. If you just look at the dictionary definition of what woke is, it's just about inclusion. It's just about anti-white supremacy. You know what? Let me just pull it up right here. Woke. What does woke mean? First thing that comes up on Wikipedia, Google. Woke is an adjective derived from African American vernacular, you know, meaning alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. That's it. That's what woke is. Okay. Beginning in the 2010s, it came to encompass a broader awareness of social inequalities or social inequities, such as sexism, and has also been used to shorthand American left's ideas, including identity politics and social justice. But they've taken the word and they've re-engineered it to mean everything that they don't like about Black people, the Democratic Party, and whatever.
We track how you started it and how it spread.
Stay Woke was introduced to the world by way of this album, New America Part 1. There's a song on this particular album called Master Teacher. And in that song, Master Teacher, the chorus is I Stay Woke. And I tweeted it about this group that was detained, Pussy Riot. They're this group of activists who are artists. And in my tweet, I said, free Pussy Riot and hashtag Stay Woke. After that, woke took off.
Then how some on the right are sort of hijacking or attacking it or giving it a different definition.
Sure.
So I want to play this for you since you bring it up, and then we could talk about it.
All right.
Even though you go through struggle and strive to keep a healthy life, stay woke. Everybody knows a black or white. There's creatures in every shape and size. Stay woke.
Stay woke. It's just urging folks to pay attention, to be alert.
Wow.
I want my coaches to stay woke, but I want the other coaches that's supporting us to stay woke.
Woke fascism that will destroy our nation.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
I think they mean black. Yeah. It's just another way to say thug or something else, right?
You know, in America, one thing that people do that are typically not well-traveled is they love to localize, you know, foreign concepts, or people are very myopic. They can only see, or one-dimensional, right? They can only see within the landmass of their state, not even the country, just their state. You know, they can't see, you know, how the world works because a lot of people just don't travel, right? Wokeness in America has become an attack on diversity and inclusion. They've looked at very America-centric issues and sort of like almost localized and co-opted the word. I mean, yeah, sure, Wokeness is it was invented by Erykah Badu, who is American. But at the end of the day, even just issues around racism, issues around inclusion, diversity, that's a global concept. And it's an English word. But a lot of times Americans take a word and they make it mean what it means to them in their myopic perspective. But the world is so diverse with so many different people. The world is so diverse with so many different people that it's kind of crazy and ridiculous to assume that a word that's not even from America is an English word, right? Racism, race, inclusion, diversity. These words don't necessarily mean what it means in your locality. This is an international word, right? So Americans sort of like think that certain words mean what it means in the context of their fishbowl. But in reality, it's just this is not what the word means. This is not what the experience is in other parts of the world. But when you actually just look at what it actually means, the term in activism, it just means inclusion. It just means diversity. And when you actually look at it, that's exactly what China has spearheaded. That's what China has created around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative and all the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement and all these other things that they're doing. That's what China has spearheaded. And so the real meaning of the word wokeness, inclusion, diversity, that's what China is representing. So this sort of like myopic perspective that go woke, go broke, it's just so localized and it's just so much like in this sort of myopic American perspective that's, untraveled, unexposed, uncultured, and all of those things. And the funny thing is, BRICS is the real woke. BRICS is actually what woke is, just by the definition of woke. Now, when you look at BRICS, what do you see? The BRIC countries, I see 2 white people. So they even added 2 of you. 2. They didn't say, no, we're only having 1 white person. There's no quota for whiteness in BRICS. They allowed 2. But they're not white enough because one is Eastern European, that's not white supreme enough, and the other one is Brazilian, and oh no, they're mixed with Latina blood, right? It's not white enough for you guys. And then what do I see when I look at BRICS? I see India, so that's representing brown, right? I see Chinese representing Eastern Asia. I see black representing, Africa. And you see all the countries that want to join in, from the Middle East to other countries in Africa. All these countries want to join in. That represents the true colors of the rainbow. The true colors of the rainbow. But what's Fox News going to tell you about? Go woke, go broke. What's Fox News going to tell you about? It's the woke people's fault that BRICS is, being created or taking over our dollars. When in actuality, it's because of white supremacy that they're doing this. This is just a combat to white supremacy and all the facets of it and all the behaviors of it. I've broken it down: the brutality, the slavery, the colonization, the extorting, the bullying. This is all the symbols of white supremacy. And so essentially, when you're watching Fox News, they need to say, we want Donald Trump because Donald Trump will maintain white supremacy the way that we know how.
China likes to posture as this really strong man. We could destabilize the Chinese Communist Party in 9 months with a proper president. You could squeeze China through a bilateral agreement with Korea, Japan, and India. And that's why America needs to be actively involved in the room and calling balls and strikes, using sanctions and tariffs where necessary, and using the global reserve currency status to be able to effectuate meaningful geopolitical change, which we do not have right now. With the proper president, the right president, we can crack that alliance in 9 months. These countries, China has a lot of domestic problems.
What would Trump do?
At the end of the day, Trump got us in this mess. Don't forget about Trump beefing China during COVID. Don't forget about Trump printing $3.3 trillion, causing hyperinflation. That was Donald Trump. So all these Republican rhetoric that says, we need a proper president. We need a president that knows what he's doing. All that rhetoric is BS, because Donald Trump got us here in the first place. He set it up, and Biden continued it by joining Ukraine.
Yeah, so Trump gets, let's just say it's 2024, okay. He wins. What's he doing?
Well, first, he could go back to what we already had, which is you have a peace immediately brokered in eastern Ukraine. Immediately.
This is a completely delusional, America-centric perspective of a conflict that has been brewing since the end of the Cold War.
You go in there and you end this stupid war, you end this proxy war. You then try to create intentional separation between Russia and China and keep them in their own corners. You go to the Saudis and you say, knock it off. You're going to keep on using the dollar for the petrodollar. You save OPEC, which will increase the dollar's strength as a world reserve currency.
Of course, a white man continuing to want to slap people on the wrists and bully them. It's just a typical thing.
And then you have to go after the CCP in like a 15-point targeted plan. You pull their visas from being able to go to Europe, you put targeted sanctions on them.
And he's also totally ignorant to Europe's dependency on China, to assume that the Europeans can just do that.
But we have to have a serious plan to punish the CCP for what they did with the virus, covering it up and lying about it. And then also their hyper-aggressive action with Belt and Road.
This is just more white supremacist wrist slapping. And it's so crazy to me, the Belt and Road Initiative, something that was designed to, support people around the world, something that the Chinese are using to uplift people around the world. You're making that seem as though it's some demonic agenda from China. It's just so ridiculously self-centered and crazy and selfish, really.
Cyber warfare, infiltrating the American economy. Some of that comes with a price and a cost. But then more than anything else, Trump, if he becomes president again, will be energy independent again. There'll be economic confidence restored. I think that we'll see inflation put under control because we'll actually have a rebirth of market stability.
Look, this is propaganda. He's pushing this idea of Donald Trump as being president. He's giving people false hope. Trump probably will do worse. If Trump becomes president, we'll probably go into a full-blown war with China. Trump is not the person that you want to be dealing with the Chinese. If you remember how he was basically screaming at President Xi or President Xi just during COVID. Do you remember that? Do you remember even when he was coming into his presidency and all he could say was China, 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 China? That's who you want to be? That's who you want to be, the person representing America in such a sensitive time? You have to be very careful. Like, this is just propaganda and people should not fall for it, because these are real lives, and Trump can escalate things into a full-blown bomb-throwing war just because he can't put down his phone and stop tweeting or whatever his new social media platform is. This is not a joke, and people need to stop joking about it because it's not funny.
It really is an indictment of the lack of confidence coming from the current regime. We need President Trump to do what he did for 4 years, which is to unshackle the American economy.
Make America great again. Let's use slaves as they're supposed to. Let's use the blacks. Let's use the Indians, the Japanese, all of them. Let's use them as we are supposed to. This is what the Republicans want. But they're not going to say that. They don't want to be canceled. So and they also want to attract people. Because let me tell you something, you can be a white supremacist. You don't have to be black. You don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. There are white supremacists of all races, all colors. It's an ideology, right? That's all it is. It's an ideology. And so they don't want to exclude people by saying overtly, like, guys, we have to save whiteness. That's what they say in private, in their private meetings. They don't want to do that. So they're going to say it in a fancy way, to distract you. But this is what they're really saying. We have to preserve white supremacy. So when at least the funny thing is that when the Democrats are saying, we're gonna make our military colorblind, we're gonna make our military diverse, the irony is that that's actually gonna help you in this situation, right? But the Republicans are like, you guys are focusing on that when we need to be focusing on preserving white supremacy, and the Democrats are saying no, because think about it, right? If your military, this is just hypothetically, just speaking, right? If your military is diverse and really truly representing America, and you're fighting in a war, God forbid that this ever happens, but hypothetically, you're fighting in a war with, the Chinese, they're going at it, and you see one Chinese person sees another Chinese person, there might be unity there. One is a Chinese American, the other one is Chinese, and they're like, yo, we're brothers. And I think that when you have that diversity, it allows for a faster way to have discourse, a faster way to have unity. What has actually caused bricks to form was because of white supremacy. Because they saw the G8, no, they saw the G7, they saw the G8. They were not included. They said they do G20, and yes, it included China and India in G20, and I think Brazil's in there too. But they said, no, that's not good enough. It's not good enough. We can create more alliances. They recognize that the world is big and diverse, and we can create more inclusion, and we don't have to be elitist. That's what woke is. That's what woke is. The Democrats, they just seem to be oblivious to this, or they know also. They just have a more softer branding to their white supremacy. It's just more subtle. It's very inclusive.
Well, if you're a rational person who took them at their word, you would assume the party, the Democratic Party, would replace Joe Biden with someone who embodies their highest values. You imagine a trans black woman with a background in corporate HR, or a Latinx drag queen with purple hair and lots of face piercings, or maybe even Kamala Harris. But no, in fact, no chance. That would be principled, and therefore they will never do it. Nominating someone you say you support? No. When Biden leaves, or more likely is shoved aside, they're going to nominate another straight white man who loves the big banks.
The fact that we're being apologetic to them, like, hey, we're so sorry, what can we do to make you happy? And you can easily, America helped China become who they are today with the relationships over the years.
There's a book that I'm reading right now. It's called The 100-Year Marathon. Very great book. China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. And it basically talks about how the Chinese, they've had this agenda since Mao Zedong to take over America, and they've been in this fighting the Chinese agenda is to be humble, be submissive. Look, this is a book written by a white American man who obviously has a very American agenda, everything that he's spewing. So as I was reading this, I kept that in mind. This is definitely American Chinese demonization propaganda, 100%. So the book breaks down how the Chinese government used this strategy called, I believe it was called Shore. They use this as a tactic to to defeat America slowly but surely. So China came in as this humble, quote unquote, weaker force, not a force, but just a humble servant in a way to assist America in its truest desires, right? And America's agenda is to be more powerful, to have more money, and China came in humbly. But with this strategy, sure, they basically use this tactic to defeat you and overthrow you by playing, the small person and using that as a tool to build economically. And then over time, they encompass you and they destroy you. And this is what the book sort of breaks down. And it's interesting because they said that the Soviets actually warned the Americans about, China's strategy, because China did that to the Soviets, I believe it was around the Cold War. They tried to do that to the Soviets. And obviously, but they weren't smart about it then. And they learned from their mistakes. So the Soviets caught them in their act and destroyed them. So I think, so they learned to be even more quiet. And this time they didn't try and take on the Soviets, who was this military rival to America, military rival, but not economic rival. So Soviet Union was, such a huge force. So the Chinese had tried to attack the Soviets too soon, and the Soviets destroyed them. And so this time they came to America, and the Soviets tried to warn America, but of course America's not going to listen to the Soviet Union because they're their enemies, right? And so the Chinese came humbly to America and, look, we'll help you with this, with manufacturing. We'll do it for pennies on the dollar. We'll make it cheap for you. Anything to support you. They use that manufacturing to, build up their middle class and become super powerful financially. And then they did this strategy with the Belt and Road Initiative and all these different little initiatives that they had, all like it's quiet little seeds planted in different places. Then all of a sudden, like a tsunami, when it was too late, America started seeing the tsunami coming. So that's how the Chinese strategy, according to this book, was to defeat America. And the way that the Chinese were able to keep this secret, not only do they control their social media, they control their state, they control all these things, and they put extreme punishment on people that, betray the government or speak up against the government, right? But more importantly, the way that they were able to do this is they have Chinese literature. And this Chinese literature is in libraries, right? But in the area of the library, it will say only army officials, or only, like, there are literally restrictions on who can access these books. And this is how they keep, and not only that, because they speak their own language, so it's in Mandarin and it's not accessible to everybody. So Americans are very America-centric. So Americans are not just going to go and think, let me go learn Chinese and let me go start sneaking these books and reading these books. But the Chinese, they come to America, they infiltrate themselves into the American, or immerse themselves into the American system. And Americans, we talk, one of our biggest, our greatest strength is our greatest weakness, and that is that we have to express ourselves, freedom of speech. We show everything, we expose everything, but the Chinese are not like that. People around the world, they're not like that. And so this is probably the reason why Americans expose a lot of their secrets, just post like how I'm talking right now online. People just do this. We just expose our secrets. And so the Chinese are absorbing our secrets, but they're not exposing theirs. And in addition to that, Americans are so America-centric, they're not even paying attention to what other people are doing. So all of these things are the ways that China used by mastering American mentalities, observing America, and then using that as a tool to overthrow America, and doing the exact opposite that America has done, right? So America goes, like a typical colonizer, goes to the Middle East, divides and conquers, goes to different countries, divides and conquers, for its own financial benefit. But China goes and does the exact opposite. Not saying that this is saying that the Chinese are better. This might just be their strategy to disguise themselves as your friend, which is like sort of what this book breaks down. So
without us giving them favored nation status, without the 1999 World Trade Organization treaty, they are a third world country, period. And we basically said, okay, we're gonna re-domicile our manufacturing assets, we're gonna close down our ability to make stuff, and we're gonna do this massive labor arbitrage where we're gonna send all the jobs to you, and we get a bunch of plastic we do not need in return.
Sure, you could say that, but also without the slave trade, without, extorting and pillaging of other nations, without all the bullying from America, America would also be a wasteland, right? You could also say that. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what woulda, coulda, shoulda happened. All that matters is what has happened, right? And at the very least, China's rise to dominance was through mutual agreement and trade.
And they're coming in and they're industrializing these countries that in a mutually beneficial way, giving the hope of a middle class, the hope of a better life, and doing it the right way with cooperation instead of coercion. And look, this is the first time in arguably 5 centuries that you don't have a political leader from the West setting the global agenda here. This is Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin that are setting the global agenda by going into these countries and making life better for everyone, and mending fences and reuniting countries that have hated each other forever under a common goal.
They're not stealing the country's wealth with fake money.
Right.
That's called counterfeiting money. So all the US had to do was print this stuff, and you could steal a nation's wealth. You could go to the Congo and take out all the stuff, the diamonds, the oil. You could go to oil producing countries, steal their wealth with fake money. And what Andy is saying, it's over, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is, and I think the common thread in all of these unions and all of this infrastructure and all of this cooperation is the drive toward mutual settlements in national currencies between Asia, Africa, and Latin America. For all practical purposes, Putin said, look, we're endorsing the role right now of the Chinese yuan as the new trade currency, while the complex discussions of our new BRICS currency or our new Shanghai Cooperation Organization settlement currency backed by gold and other commodities proceed. They went in there and said, we want to use the yuan right now in order to bridge the gap between the new currencies that we will issue as a united front that will be pegged and backed to commodities. The de-dollarization, the lack of demand for the dollar, is going to increase inflation exponentially. And that's not even talking about when the switch is flipped and they all dump things at the same time. And if you look at what the two of them said as they parted ways just the other day in their meeting, Xi Jinping says to Putin, and they have this on camera, he says, now there are changes that haven't happened in 100 years. And when we are together, we drive these changes. Putin says, I agree. You are witnessing a 100-year change. And when the switch flips, all of these countries have joined together in harmony, in mutual beneficial trade, in a united front against the hegemony and hypocrisy that they perceive from the West, and they flip the switch and they dump dollars globally. It will be a religious experience in this country. If you are not prepared, you're dead.
Don't be fooled by the Chinese either. Like, yes, it seems as though the Chinese are doing all these initiatives, and it seems as though, and I did say in the previous episode that, look, how you start something is typically how you end something. But from reading this book, ever since I made that episode, reading this book, you understand that what the Chinese show people that they are, or let me say past tense, because I'm not saying that this is what they do all the time, but what they showed America that they were is not what they actually ended up being. And they did this to the Russians, but they actually exposed themselves. They didn't have their sure strategy down when they did it with the Russians. I believe it was during the Cold War. They didn't have it down to the T, so they learned from that mistake. And then they they came in again and they attacked. They came in, they tried again, and then they attacked the Americans. And the whole concept is that you're supposed to circle your opponent. You're supposed to circle your opponent, as you guys both. It's some sort of Chinese game that they allude to in the book, but you circle your opponent, and it's the idea is like who can actually defeat the other person without the other person realizing they're being defeated.
It's because they've captured our elites, and they call it elite capture in actually Mandarin. They have purchased the head of the NBA. They purchased the Wall Street. They purchase, the top people. Peter Schweitzer put this in his book, Red-Handed, where he talks about how the American elites are bought and paid for by the CCP. And the robber barons that made those deals, and I don't say that lightly because I'm a capitalist, but it was bad for the West, designed this entire thing. But when you have a relaxed monetary currency, which we do, it necessitates neoliberalism.
We exported everything that was great about America to another country and got mad when other countries took our model, remixed it, and used it against us. We got to keep some stuff homegrown.
Who were the architects of that deal in 1999?
Well, Bill Clinton signed it, but it was largely driven by consultants. McKinsey & Company was the largest company that was basically pushing, the kind of idea that we're going to go to a company and say, we'll be able to solve, you see right there, McKinsey & Company, right there. What was that, 2019? Yep. And we're going to go in, we'll save you, pennies on a dollar. You could make this trinket in China for this. Even this tie right here is made in China. I was like wearing it earlier. Are you kidding me? Why can't we make this here? It's because, we want to try to get the lowest cost. And for certain products, it made sense. But why do we make penicillin and vitamin C? 90% of all of our vitamin C comes from China. Like, that makes no sense. And so we offshored our critical infrastructure to a country that seemed to be kind of a passive country, and it's now turned into our greatest enemy.
And what have we gained from that? Just lower prices when you go to Walmart?
I'll tell you what we've gained. Our homes are twice as big as they were in the 1950s, with twice as much garbage that we do not use, and they're half filled. They're twice as empty because we have less kids. So we have We have piles of plastic we do not use and factories that are empty. And then, in return, we fill our entire communities with fentanyl made by the Chinese Communist Party, pumped through by the Sinaloa drug cartel, and we lose 107,000 people a year to drug overdoses.
And Maquiladora. Maquiladora means little sister. Maquiladora was the concept of putting a small factory in Mexico where the labor was cheaper and products could be made, and then they would take a very short walk to the United States.
Yep.
So if that WTO deal doesn't happen in favor of China, it would have turned Mexico into the larger manufacturing power.
That's exactly
and
right.
what would have happened to the Mexican economy? You would have had the eruption, the good eruption of the middle class in Mexico.
such a good
And
point.
you can trace it right back to the issues that we have with Mexico, to the gang-style violence that there are in terms of controlling government areas in Mexico. Whereas if this happened, you would have turned them into 1950s United States manufacturing power. And what would have that done to our relationship with Mexico to the
It
south?
would have made our continent a superpower continent, is what it would have done.
You see the irony here, but the U.S. wanted to keep Mexico poor. The U.S. could have united with Mexico and become this supercontinent, but of course, the U.S. wanted to keep Mexico poor and keep them under their control and exploit their labor, right? For cheap. So they sought out China for these manufacturing deals. And what did that do? It just proves that tribalism is all over the world. Mexico is your neighbor, but you don't, outsource your manufacturing to your neighbors because you don't want them to you don't want to build up their middle class. So you go across the continent and you create a real enemy who might even go to war with right now. Tribalism. This is tribalism. At the end of the day, look, we're bad to our neighbors and we weaken them in order to empower countries across the world, but this is myopic behavior and it's proven to be detrimental. The Chinese had a similar sort of relationship with Russia, their neighbor. They had this sort of tension and this competitive nature. Obviously, Russia was a military superpower, so they could still bully China, but China learned from Russia's mistakes. That's not even what I'm talking about right now, but they had this sort of tension with each other. And what happened in the 90s, the Chinese come to America, Russia's enemy, their neighbor's enemy, to partner with them. But that builds China economically, right? And so it's almost as though China wisened up, and once they were built up economically and they almost beat Russia at their own game, they now joined forces with Russia and said, look, I guess Russia said, look, you can't beat them, you join them. And so it's interesting because you have to understand, China and Russia are neighbors, right? Russia is this military superpower, right? But they fail economically, right? They're not that strong economically. America has the money and the military. But China says, look, we're not going to invest so much money into our military. We're going to still have a solid military to make sure that we have a good defense system, but we don't need to spend as much money as America or even Russia in our military. Because look, we can see how that caused Russia's downfall. Instead of putting that money into our military, we're going to put that money into our economy to make our economy boom and thriving. And that was an interesting sort of dynamic between them and Russia, because look, if anything, they have their neighbor Russia to be sort of a military force that supports them in case America wants to come after them, right? So it's almost like they wisened up, they learned from Russia's mistake, their neighbors, they were able to go to their neighbor's enemy, America, brokered this deal to solve manufacturing, did that in Europe, did that around the world. Then once they started making all this money in manufacturing, they said, okay, let's now not only partner back with our neighbors, the Russians, but also let's actually defeat the bigger enemy, America, right? And by supporting people, empowering people around the world, the people that America have oppressed, the people that America has insulted, the people that white supremacy have attacked, China has been watching all of this stuff, and they're saying, we're going to do the exact opposite. Now, I'm not saying that China's the better option, but They are definitely smart. They are definitely smart, and they've been watching all of America's mistakes, and they have solved this. They literally have solved this in a very, interesting way. And we have to understand that China is thousands of years old. America is a new country. America is just a few hundred years old. China is thousands of years old. And in addition to that, China has had the Ming Empire. China has been a superpower in the past. So their goal was to regain their status as a global hegemony. That's as a global superpower, as the global superpower. That's China's objective. And they have, so many years of literature and history to pull from that America just doesn't have as a nation. So yes, so this 100-year marathon that it took China when they reimagined themselves as the global superpower, and that's 100 years since Mao, I believe, was in office. This 100-year marathon is not a long time compared to the thousands of years that China has been in existence, as opposed to America, that 100 years in America is like, wow, that's like, a big chunk of America's existence, right? Because America is a young country. So you have to understand that their perspective is different. The way China sees things and the way America sees things is different, because America just doesn't have the depth of national history to pull from that China does.
Why did not we have the foresight to do something like that?
Because you could make it for cheaper. They were chasing the labor costs. He's absolutely correct.
Labor. And I hate to be that blunt, but the Chinese Communist Party basically said pennies per wage hour for us to be able to make a shoe. And they were chasing the wage hour. And look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a free market guy, but also I want markets to point towards something virtuous and good. And not every deal you do is going to always be in that proper context. The Chinese Communist Party deal is a bad deal. And the people that defend it, it's indefensible.
It's interesting because when it comes to white supremacy, their greatest strength is their greatest weakness. Now, you have to ask, what built white supremacy, right? Capitalism. You read the book. There's a book that I'm reading, that I was reading, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. And when we moved out of our feudal era in Africa, and the way Europe actually moved out of their feudal era first is capitalism. Once Europe got into the capitalistic phase, that's when they started seeing the impact of having slaves, right? And the whole slave trade is what caused the emergence of capitalism, right? Or what fueled the emergence of capitalism. And so white supremacy and capitalism were birthed together. They have the same sort of source or root, right? And so naturally, it's inherently flawed in that sense. But China has shown us that there is a way to be a capitalist without white supremacy. And that's what they're changing the game of white supremacy, of capitalism. But the West cannot unlearn something that has worked for them for hundreds of years, right? So that's one thing, right? So when I say that capitalism, when you look at the West, their greatest strength is their greatest weakness, what do I mean? China has used their greatest strength, what got them to where they are today, capitalism and white supremacy, right? Got them to where they are today. They use that to their disadvantage. How? By moving American manufacturing, European manufacturing out of Europe and America to China, right? For pennies on the dollar, for cheap. So Americans are, at the end of the day, the highest bidder is going to win in a capitalistic world. There is no integrity. There is no respect. It's about who's going to pay me the most money. Profits over everything, right? And that's how China got them, like a rat, that smells cheese in the kitchen. A capitalist is going to smell money. A white supremacist is going to smell money. And what happens? You get caught in the Chinese trap. This is exactly what they've done to them. And it is what it is, right? They beat them at their own game. It's quite fascinating.
The White House, the Biden administration is filled with a bunch of traditional, conventional political figures that grew up over the last 20 years talking about cooperating with China. We saw how that worked out. They took all of our jobs, they took all of our factories, they got rich, we got poorer, their middle class grew, our middle class shrunk. They make things and we don't. You think about all of the values that make you a strong society, family, children's, patriotism, all of that is diminished. The only thing that matters now, the thing that has gone up, is people care about money, and I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but China knows it and they use it against us. And they know that in America, they believe one day there are enough people to pressure their politicians because they care more about buying cheap shirts off an app from China than they do about standing up for their own country. At some point, we need to figure out that we are Americans. Someone needs to stand up for this country. If we don't, no one will. And that the world is a better place because of America, and it'll be a worse place if America declines.
So this is the end of white supremacy as we know it. And the irony is that now it's the rest of the world versus white supremacy. And everybody is throwing a tantrum in the West because they're like, how dare you? How dare you? But the rest of the world's like, we don't care, and we're gonna do it. And that's what's funny.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
That's right.
They're the Magilla behind the whole thing, where it used to be the dollar.
That is exactly correct. That is exactly correct. And when you talked about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you got China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Russia, I can't even pronounce half of these stands, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, they're full members, but you also have, as dialogue partners, you have Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Belarus, Cambodia, Kuwait, Maldives, Mongolia, Myanmar, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Qatar. They're all coming together. When you put all of these together, you're talking 80% of human population coming together against the Western hegemony. And the glue that will make it stick is the pledging of commodities to the system. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has told the world that they want to have a settlement currency for the entire Eurasian landmass backed by gold.
10 years ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping gave a speech in Kazakhstan and proposed a new economic corridor of a new Silk Road. No journalists or think tanks in the West understood the transformative nature of what would become the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. But Xi Jinping was planting the seed of a multipolar world. China's BRI has grown to include 149 countries, that's 76% of the entire planet, and has built infrastructure projects worth upwards of $4 trillion. 10 years ago, China's BRI ambitions seemed impossible, but fast forward to today, and more than 1,000 freight trains link China and Europe every month. China's Belt and Road is about connectivity, trade, cooperation, digital revolution, e-commerce, and a myriad of infrastructure developments.
But we have to have a serious plan to punish the CCP for what they did with the virus, covering it up and lying about it, and then also their hyper-aggressive action with Belt and Road.
There's several groups that are all tied together like this. The Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, and the Eurasian Economic Union, where the Belt Road Initiative has every one of the 13 OPEC producing countries on the Belt Road, the largest infrastructure project in human history. It's all connecting through trade routes, if you will. For example, the north-south corridor that connects from Iran to India and allows Iran and Russia and India to trade without going around waters that are patrolled by the US Navy. It allows them to have the ability to reach each other much more quickly and without the Western influence. And all of these routes and all of these agreements are bringing the world together against the West. And it's
is it really a road?
The Belt Road Initiative are roads, bridges, maritime channels, railways, all of these things. And all of these things are coming together.
Years and years ago, Marco Polo days, it was called the Silk Road.
It's the exact same thing, but it's more than that too. You have this deal, and if you look at what China is doing, You know, right now you have Iran and Iraq, of all countries who've hated each other for centuries, are currently in a broker deal by China in the final stages on work of the first rail connection between the two states in history. And they can easily connect. It's a 1,500 kilometer railway. They can also connect Syria and Lebanon, all part of the Belt Road Initiative.
You go to the Saudis and you say, knock it off. You're going to keep on using the dollar for the petrodollar. You save OPEC, which will increase the dollar strength as a world reserve currency.
You know, as a typical white supremacist, or what did I say I was going to call it, white preferring individual, you know, of course, his perspective is the only way to rise up is by oppressing others. That's what his forefathers have done. That's what they did to get to where they are. You know, bunch of books, bunch of links that I'm going to put down below for you guys to read for so you have references. But of course, he's going to say oppress others. But it's so ironic because the Chinese are doing the opposite. You know, we rise by lifting others, and that's exactly what the Chinese are doing. So this idea of like save OPEC only based on Western interests, only based on Western agendas. So it's not about saving OPEC, it's about controlling OPEC for a white supremacist agenda. But as far as we see, OPEC is enjoying the benefits of partnering with their, with Middle Eastern countries, coming back together, unifying, and, working with China, but more importantly, respecting their neighbor. What do they say in the biblical works? Love thy neighbor as yourself. But it's so funny how when capitalism just blurs people's minds, or white supremacy blurs people's minds, they forget about some of the values that they preach themselves when they're in church or whatever religion that they have. It's interesting. So China is slowly putting all the pieces together, meddling in the Middle East conflict and actually uniting them, which is actually interesting because this is why you just can't believe everything you see in propaganda, right? When you think about what is America's involvement in the Middle East, and I talked about the agreement, the petrodollar agreement that it made with Saudi Arabia, it actually fueled the division within the Middle East. America acted like a typical colonizer, went to the Middle East, saw that these guys are tribalistic, they're having these tribalistic types of wars, and kind of divided and conquered. And so this is how they brokered deal, because Saudi Arabia wanted to be the superpower in the Middle East, and America facilitated that by supporting them with American military, but in exchange for the petrodollar. So backing dollars buy oil and making sure everybody that buys oil has to buy it in US dollars. So this was the agreement, but what did that do? It caused a divide in the Middle East. But what is China going in to do?
It's really being overlooked, in my opinion, by the media, and I don't quite understand it. And this is the peace deal that has been brokered, by the only adult in the room, and that has been China, brokering a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two mortal enemies.
And also, isn't Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq also?
Well, Iran and Iraq, they've also brokered a peace deal between Iran and Iraq, where they've now built a railway between the two countries. Yeah. They are mending fences. But in terms of what happened in Saudi Arabia, here you got Sunni and Shiite. They've been at each other's throats for centuries. And it is a reconciliation between the two countries brokered by China, and the two countries are now reestablishing diplomatic ties and opening embassies in each other's country. You have other Gulf states that are coming together, like the UAE and Kuwait, but all of this, none of them more important than what just happened, and that is the Chinese mediated Iran, Saudi Arabia deal, where they're now building, for the first time ever, they're putting embassies in each other's countries, and they are coming together, I think, in what is mutual cooperation, where everyone economically cooperates in mutually beneficial ways with the view not only towards building common destiny, but this represents a massive nail in the Western hegemony, where all of these countries, where the West has really precipitated and this constant bickering, China's coming in and building infrastructure in Africa, in South America, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Iraq, and all of these countries, they come in, they build infrastructure, and they are creating cooperation. against the West.
The proof is just in the pudding. And I'm not this China advocate. Every country has its flaws. I just think we have to look at these things objectively. China is going into the Middle East and they're brokering partnerships. They're making Iran and Saudi Arabia, who have been mortal enemies for decades, maybe even longer. They're uniting them. Iran, Iraq, all these countries that had conflict are being united. Because of what? China? China knows what it's doing, but the proof is in the pudding. How did America rise to fame, rise to power, and how has China done that? China has done it through collaboration, mutual benefit. I'm not saying that China is a better option. I'm not saying that, because you never know. The snake might come out down the line. You never know. But I'm just saying, it's just interesting to observe, and how you start something is typically how you finish it, right? It's going to be hard for China to start, beating on a new tune when this is the tune that they set the tune of, collaboration and mutual benefits. And it'll be interesting to see them change the tune. I don't think so. I don't think it'll be hard. It will be hard for them to do that, but they're capable, because as I'm breaking down for you all the little pieces to the Chinese puzzle. So what else is there? Developing BRICS, and that's potentially even a currency, right? The Belt and Road Initiative, that's the idea of building infrastructure in all these countries, so many countries. So the Chinese were very smart, because they broke all these initiatives up into different pieces, started these organizations, no one could see it coming, and they disguised them by doing that. So nobody could see that it was coming into formation. No one could see that the power of China was building. And then now it's all coming together like a tsunami over the US's global domination. But the real question is this such a bad thing? That's the question. Is it such a bad thing? Is it really the worst thing in the world if China destabilizes the dollar? And more importantly, because I think people just assume that if the dollar declines, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. No, absolutely not. There's now we're in this new era where it's becoming more obvious that there's enough room for two superpowers to thrive. And unfortunately, the US and China their tensions are so high right now. They see this as a threat. And they're talking about war. They're talking about war. And I think it's so sad. And I hope the war, if it is a war, I hope it remains a Cold War, not an actual war. That would be stupid. But if they do go into war with each other, it would be, I don't know. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have two countries that are superpowers. If China surpasses America a little bit, it's going to be fine. America could still thrive. America could, especially, when you look at the UK did not decline because America became the superpower. And the irony here is that, yeah, sure, when it comes to the UK, America, the past 500 years have been ruled by the West. The past 500 years has been about the West, about Western empires, Dutch Empire, British Empire, American Empire. And so even though one empire falls, they're still white. And by white, they're still Western European / American. And so because of this white supremacist agenda ensures that they still support each other. So even though Britain fell, as the superpower, America and Britain have very close relationships, very close ties. In fact, America and Britain probably are the closest allies, but they're very, very close ties. And so now that this power is shifting to China and the East, well, that's not going to preserve white supremacy. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because the rest of the world, we're just tired. Tired of white supremacy. We're tired of all of it. And there's a level of audacity that a lot of white supporting people have, or yes, this thing is complicated. On one side, it's the dollar, it's your livelihood. Everybody in this country is multicultural, so everybody will feel it. So you might not see it from that perspective. If you're looking at it from a very like myopic standpoint, you know, or microscopic standpoint from a country level. But when you take yourself out of America and you just look at the world and you understand how some countries suffer because of America's capitalism, how America extorts some countries from their resources and uses it to make America richer, and America sells them back their goods, or America, you know, bombs other countries. When you look at it from that perspective, you'll understand that, like, ultimately, even in the America that we are in, it's the whites that they let rule. The blacks don't get the same standard. So you might be black in America, you might be whatever in America, you're still a second-class citizen in this country. You don't get the best that you can get, right? And you can get incredible things. But if you were in your homeland, you had this kind of wealth that you have in America, you would be treated, you'd be treated better than you would be treated in America. And so I say all this to say that, yeah, it's myopic because you're thinking about it from your own experience in America, but you gotta take yourself out of here. You have to understand what America is doing to the rest of the world, and how really, when you look at it from that perspective, you really understand how white supremacy is declining. The world is fed up of sort of like the rhetoric of white supremacy, and you just see all of them just throwing a tantrum. And the irony is that the Democrats and the Republicans, they're no better than each other. They're just both as bad. Now it's now begging the question, is democracy the best standard for a nation? When you look at China, and I don't condone sort of like the way, I love freedom, I love, there are pros and cons to everything, I'll say it that way. But when you look at China, there are some benefits in having, they don't call it a communist, I'm trying to remember what they call it, but it's very autocratic, right? So you have one guy, he's been there, he's just started his third term. And so he's been there for so long, and the country is going in one direction. Just like a company. Companies are autocratic. Companies go in one direction because they have one leader that stays there and takes them in that one direction. But with America, Trump might have had a vision with how he was going to, print all these dollars, but still resurrect us from that in his second term, right? But because we took him out, we put Biden in, Biden did something else. And equally as bad, joining Ukraine and seizing Russia's dollars, and that was equally stupid. That was equally as bad as Trump. And so, this changing that democracy requires might just actually not be the best for a superpower country. Who knows? So I hope you enjoyed this video. This channel, I talk about money, I talk about its moneytainment, about making money and all those things, but I think that it's so important to understand the political landscape to enhance your ability to make money, because the last thing you want to do is invest in a country when there's a war that's about to happen or there's a recession that's about to happen. So if you want to make the best financial decisions, you have to watch, the geopolitical landscape. You have to pay attention to politics, and you have to watch what's going on. And so that's why I took the time out to break some of these concepts for you, so you can see these different perspectives, but you can also see the opportunities that are arising, because there's money everywhere. Yeah, sure, the dollar is declining. Some people are saying it's going to take 30 years, 10 to 30 years, who knows really. But I think the best thing that I would say is to diversify. If people are thinking of investing in the stock market, I would just say no, that's not a great decision right now, but do you? You're thinking about buying a house, maybe, look at buying a house in other countries. Like, I know people are buying houses in Bali, and they're putting it on Airbnb. People are buying houses in different places. It's up to you to go and research an emerging market, because you want to come in before the boom. I would say Bali has already boomed. So if I was gonna, do that, I wouldn't go to Bali to buy a house. I would search for a place that's going to boom, and then I would invest in that, because you really want to take advantage of an opportunity before it happens. If everybody's talking about it, it's not a good investment. So you want to be searching around the world. Where's a good place to invest? What are some emerging markets that I can invest in? Of course, diversify, put your money in different places. But I know people are investing in China. I know people that are investing in the Middle East. People are investing all over the world. So I would say, open up your mind, do some research, and, you know, look at investing outside the US. Look at investing outside the dollar. Look at buying precious metals. Right now, if you want to save money, gold, silver, you know, gold and silver. Those are the things that, you know, if you really want to save, don't save in cash. Don't save in the banks. We see what's going on with banks. Don't save in the banks because they only take your money and they invest it. So these are some important things to understand. AI is a great, you know, if I was going to invest, guess what I would invest in too? AI, microchip companies. But if I were you, I would look at good investments in that way. I would look at what is emerging, what's happening, what's about to happen. And you can never really tell these things, but you just really have to just research. Always be looking for the next good investment. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. More videos coming soon. More episodes. I still have to make some more episodes, but I just feel like I'm not getting enough views, so I might not. Guys, I would love to make more episodes, but I feel like I'm just not getting enough views. So if I get 50 likes on this video, I'll make another episode. If I don't get 50 likes, then I probably will ditch part 3 and 4, which is about central bank and digital currencies. What's another episode? I was gonna do more episodes, but I just feel like I'm not getting enough views. So guys, I want to see 50 likes. That's just 50 likes. If I see that, I'll continue this series. I'm really having fun with it. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. You're watching the University of Making Money. I'm your host, Kenim O, and I'll see you in the next one. A peace.